I never thought I'd be in this situation. My wife is planning to visit her sister overseas for 2 weeks, and while I'm happy she gets to spend time with family, there's this growing uneasiness I can't shake off. It all started with our neighbor Sarah, who lives a few houses down the street. Over the past year, my wife became really close friends with Sarah. At first, everything seemed normal, just neighbors being friendly. But something changed. Sarah started making me uncomfortable with her behavior. Initially, I brushed it off as harmless joking, but now I'm not so sure. The real problem started when my wife told me about her travel plans. She mentioned that she had a chat with Sarah, who immediately offered to drop off food for me and my 11-year-old daughter Katie while my wife was away. What bothered me wasn't just the offer itself, but how Sarah apparently insisted even when my wife seemed hesitant. When my wife finally agreed without asking me first, I had to speak up. It makes me uncomfortable, I told my wife directly, but she just brushed off my concerns, saying Sarah means well and that it would be rude to refuse now. That's when I said, okay, but don't be surprised if Katie and I forget to open the door when she comes knocking. My wife called me a jerk for rejecting someone's kindness, but she doesn't see what I see. This morning, I tried explaining my concerns again. My wife insisted Sarah has no ulterior motives, even bringing up how Sarah always talks about her own husband, who's in the military and isn't home much. When I suggested telling Sarah we don't need food deliveries, my wife said it would be awkward to mention it right before her trip, adding that it would only be once or twice a week. Then she dropped another bomb. Sarah had given her a spare key to her house just in case of emergencies. While it was Sarah's house key and not ours, something about the whole situation felt off. I haven't told my wife everything about Sarah's behavior. The unnecessary physical contact, like hugging me whenever she sees me, something that didn't bother me at first but now makes me increasingly uneasy. Or the suggestive comments she makes, and the way she dresses and carries herself when she visits our house. It all feels calculated. After talking with friends online about the situation, I decided to take action. The day after my wife left home, she departed a few hours past midnight. I installed a doorbell camera. Better safe than sorry, right? The first few days were actually pretty great. Katie and I fell into a nice routine. She goes to summer day camp during my work hours, but we spend every evening together watching movies, taking walks, and playing video games. My wife had planned to teach Katie cooking this summer, so I decided to take that on myself. Turns out Katie's a natural in the kitchen. She picks up instructions quickly, and we've been having a blast. But then Sarah showed up with food, just like she promised my wife. I decided to be polite just this once and opened the door. I thanked her but made it clear we didn't need any more deliveries since Katie and I would be cooking together. She seemed fine until she was leaving when she said in this weird tone, "If there's anything else I can do for you, please let me know." When I politely declined again, she added, "Well, if you ever crave anything else, just let me know." Think of it as a substitute for your wife. I felt my stomach turn at those words. But that wasn't even the end of it. The very next morning, things got more complicated. Katie and I were rushing to get her to camp when Sarah suddenly appeared out of nowhere. She started telling me about how her driveway was being resurfaced and asked if she could park her car in our driveway for a few days. Being in a rush and feeling somewhat obligated after she brought food, I agreed. The moment I drove away, I knew I'd made a mistake. I'd just given her a perfect excuse to hang around our house. Sure enough, later that day, while I was doing chores in the garage, Sarah pulled up in her car. The driveway work was real, I could see that, but what followed wasn't about parking at all. She started going on about her husband, telling me how unappreciated she felt and how they barely spend time together anymore. I kept quiet, only saying I was sorry she felt that way. Looking for an escape, I checked my phone and pretended Katie had texted me about pickup. It wasn't exactly her pickup time, but it was close enough. I quickly said goodbye and locked up. The next few days were relatively quiet. Sarah's driveway got finished, and she took her car back. I barely saw her after that, which was a relief. During video calls with my wife, I learned something interesting. Her sister really doesn't like Sarah. Apparently, she thinks my wife is too trusting and was pretty upset about the whole food delivery arrangement. Hearing this made me feel less crazy about my own suspicions. As my wife's return date got closer, I focused on getting the house ready. The afternoon before she was due back, I needed to mow our lawn. Usually, I sometimes mow Sarah's lawn too, just like her husband has done for us in the past. My wife has even asked me to do it a few times. But given everything that had happened, I deliberately waited until Sarah's car was gone to do the yard work, hoping to avoid any interaction. Just my luck, as I was putting the mower away, Sarah's car pulled into her driveway. She called out to me, asking when my wife would be back. When I told her it would be that night, she seemed weirdly happy about it. Then she looked me up and down. I was sweaty from the yard work and said I looked hot. Maybe she meant it innocently, but with her track record, I doubted it. She suggested Katie and I should come over for drinks to cool down. I declined as politely as I could and got out of there. My wife finally arrived home late that night, exhausted from her flight. We barely had time to talk about her trip before she fell asleep. I planned to show her the doorbell camera footage and discuss Sarah the next day after she'd rested. But when morning came, she was still asleep when I had to run some errands. That's when everything really blew up. When I got back from my errands, I found my wife awake and clearly upset. Katie had gone out with her friend, so it was just us. Turns out Sarah had texted my wife as soon as she woke up, welcoming her back and inviting her over. My wife, still jet-lagged and probably not thinking clearly, agreed to go. What she found at Sarah's house set off all kinds of alarm bells. The living room was messier than usual, but that wasn't what caught my wife's attention. There on Sarah's sofa was a pair of men's exercise shorts, identical to a pair I'd lost about a month ago. Even more disturbing was what looked like a condom wrapper on the floor next to the shorts. During their conversation, Sarah kept talking about how kind I'd been to her while my wife was away, going on and on about how much we talked. She even had the nerve to suggest that my wife should have extended her stay at her sister's, saying she'd been doing such a good job looking after Katie and me. My wife told me she felt sick to her stomach and left Sarah's house as quickly as she could. She was in such a panic that she called her sister right away. Her sister, bless her, called BS on the whole thing. She pointed out how everything seemed too perfectly placed, like it was staged. That helped calm my wife down a bit, but she still had questions. When she asked me about my contact with Sarah during her absence, I told her everything, the food delivery, the car situation, and our conversation from the day before. Then I showed her the doorbell camera footage. My wife's face changed as she watched Sarah's flirting attempts. She's not even trying to hide it, my wife said, looking disgusted. She told me she felt sick thinking about all her past interactions with Sarah now. The shorts are still bothering us, though. They really could be mine, the ones that went missing. Sarah has been in our house before, so she could have taken them. But we can't prove it. The whole thing feels calculated, especially considering how Sarah gave my wife her house key before she left. It's like she was setting something up. What's even more disturbing is that we're starting to wonder if Sarah's husband might be okay with what she's doing. My wife is planning to return Sarah's house key in the next few days, but we're both on edge about what might happen next. Looking back, I wish I'd trusted my gut earlier and been more direct about my concerns. But hindsight is always clearer, isn't it? At least now my wife sees Sarah's true colors. We've learned a hard lesson about being too trusting with neighbors, no matter how friendly they seem at first. For now, we're focusing on strengthening our own relationship and keeping our distance from Sarah. But living just a few houses down from someone who tried to destroy your marriage is not going to be easy.